Good evening. I am Allie Rosenberg.
And I'm Stacy Science.
On behalf of the Town of Newcastle Holocaust and Human Rights Committee, the students of the Enough Club and the Enough Junior Club, we welcome you to our 5th annual International Holocaust Remembrance Day program. We would like to recognize the dignitaries who are here with us tonight, Senator Pete Harcum and Newcastle Town Supervisor Victoria Tip, and Darlene Brienza here representing Congressman Mike Lawler. Additionally, we would like to thank Horace Greeley High School Principal Dr. Sandra Seppi and Enough Club Advisor Helen Harrison and Enough Junior Advisors Lori Lichtenstein and Jamie Egan.
We'd like to thank Congressman Mike Lawler, who has issued a congressional proclamation recognizing International Holocaust Remembrance Day 2024, whereas the students of Horace Greeley High School Club Enough, in collaboration with the Town of Newcastle Holocaust and Human Rights Committee, are dedicated to promoting awareness, understanding, and remembrance of the Holocaust, and whereas the Holocaust stands as one of the darkest chapters in human history, where millions of innocent lives were systematically and brutally extinguished by the Nazis during World War II, and whereas it is our solemn duty to honor the memory of the victims and survivors of the Holocaust each year on the 27th day of January, to educate future generations about the atrocities committed, and to ensure that such acts of hatred and discrimination are never repeated. And whereas the students of Horace Greeley High School Club Enough and the Enough Junior Club have taken upon themselves the responsibility to organize a Holocaust Remembrance Day event, fostering a spirit of unity, tolerance, and empathy within our community, and whereas the Town of Newcastle Holocaust and Human Rights Committee proudly supports and collaborates with the Horace Greeley High School Club Enough and Enough Junior in their efforts to commemorate Holocaust Remembrance Day and promote a world where human rights are cherished and protected. Now, therefore, I, Congressman Mike Lawler, on behalf of the residents of the 17th Congressional District of the State of New York, do hereby proclaim January 27, 2024 as International Holocaust Remembrance Day in Chappaqua and throughout Westchester County. I urge all residents to join us in honoring the memory of the victims, reflecting on the lessons of history, and working towards a future where tolerance, understanding, and human rights prevail. As there will soon be a day where those who are firsthand witnesses to the Holocaust can no longer share their stories, we feel so lucky to have everyone here tonight to witness Leo Ullman's story in person. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening. My name is Elliot Science, and I'm the president of Horace Greeley High School's Enough Club.
Hi, I'm Serena Traven. I'm an 8th grader at Seven Bridges Middle School, and I am part of the Enough Junior Club.
Hi, I'm Phoebe Rosenberg. I'm a 7th grader, and I'm a member of the Enough Junior Club.
The mission of Enough, which stands for Educate Now on Understanding Genocide and Hate, is to empower students to stand up to hate and develop a community of acceptance through education and the understanding of people's differences. International Holocaust Remembrance Day is recognized annually on January 27th, which is the anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, the concentration camp that my great-grandfather was in. On this day, we honor the 6 million Jewish victims of the Holocaust, as well as the millions of other victims of the Nazi regime.
Sadly, anti-Semitism is surging at alarming rates across the world, and Holocaust denial is increasing among our generation. We must commit to sharing this history and ensuring that the Holocaust never occurs again.
As we are the last generation to live among Holocaust survivors, we do not take our responsibility lightly. Tonight, as you listen to Mr. Ullman, you all will become a witness, and it is our collective responsibility to share Mr. Ullman's story and message with future generations.
And now we'd just like to invite up our new town supervisor, Victoria Tip.
Good evening, everyone. I first want to take a moment to recognize the very special people who made this event possible. I want to recognize the students of the Enough Club and their co-presidents, Elliot Seance and Ben Prober, and the Town of Newcastle Holocaust and Human Rights Committee and their co-chairs, Tacey Scions and Alexandra Rosenberg. Thank you so much to all of you. Your dedication and your commitment to this work has made this very meaningful event possible. And I want to especially thank Leo Ullman. Thank you for your generosity in sharing your time with us today, and thank you for sharing your story and your wisdom. The name of Greeley's student club, Educate Now on Understanding Genocide and Hate, is as relevant as ever. The October 7th atrocities in Israel represent the largest killing of Jews since the Holocaust. The ensuing surge of anti-Semitism and the challenges to Israel's existence underscore the urgent need for education and remembrance, including the recognition of Israel as the Jewish homeland as a direct response to the Holocaust. The Holocaust remains an unparalleled tragedy where 6 million Jews were systematically persecuted and murdered by the Nazi regime. Today, we honor their memory and vow to never forget their suffering and their courage. Confronting the painful truths of the Holocaust and standing united against bigotry and hatred are imperative to ensure that such atrocities are never again committed. The Holocaust was not a sudden occurrence. It evolved from a gradual breakdown of norms of civility and compassion and the normalization of intolerance and hatred. Following October 7th, there's been a staggering 337% increase in anti-Semitic incidents between that date and December. This has been reported by the ADL, and with numbers, we've had 231 incidents as compared to 465 in the same period in the previous year. We have seen alarming hatred on university campuses and propagation of anti-Jewish and anti-Israel narratives in curricula. Ignoring smaller acts of bigotry have emboldened and made possible larger displays of hatred. And so today, the voices of Holocaust survivors resonate with renewed significance. As we honor the memory of victims and survivors of the Holocaust, let's reaffirm our commitment to build a world of compassion, tolerance, and mutual respect, where horrors of the past and now the present are never forgotten or denied, and where the promise of never again rings true for all of humanity. And now I would like to introduce Horace Greeley Principal, Dr. Sandra Seppi.
Good evening, everyone. It is my honor to be here tonight to speak at this important event. But I do want to take a moment to thank Ben and Elliot and the Enough Club for all they do to educate everyone at Horace Greeley about anti-Semitism, about the horrors of the Holocaust, and their work has been tremendous, and I greatly appreciate it. As I was preparing for tonight, I recalled a chilling act that took place in 2009 at Auschwitz that serves as a stark reminder of the importance of preserving the history of the Holocaust. The infamous Nazi sign bearing the cruel message, "Work makes you free," was stolen by 5 individuals in the pre-dawn hours in an attempt to erase history. Although the sign was recovered, this act of vandalism compels us to work much harder at safeguarding the memory of the millions of innocent people whose lives were lost in the Holocaust. Artifacts will deteriorate, and survivors will not always be here to tell their story. As a result, we have a duty to ensure that the stories of survivors remain alive. My own father, a serviceman in the American Army at the end of World War II, once recounted to me the proximity of his unit to Dachau in May 1945. He only told me one thing, and that was we were a mile away, but you could smell death. His words were few, but it was clear to me that the weight of that experience haunted him for the rest of his life. Similarly, I stumbled upon the same exact disturbing phrase while I was reading about the atrocities of October 7th. Visitors to the Kibbutz Be'eri and Nora Music Festival stated that they could smell death. These visceral experiences, recounted by those who were witnesses to history, demand our attention and demand us to stand up for Jewish people everywhere. It is crucial for us, regardless of our religious or cultural backgrounds, to acknowledge the responsibility we bear in standing up against these atrocities. My father's brief account and the shared sentiment of those who witnessed other tragedies serve as a call for vigilance. We must be dedicated to preserving the truth and passing along the stories of survivors we know, as complacency paves the way for history to repeat itself. Unfortunately, anti-Semitism is rampant. It is our collective responsibility to be allies in the fight against hatred and discrimination. We must stand up, we must speak out, and educate others so that the darkness of the past does not cast its shadow on our future. Let us honor the survivors, remember the fallen, and ensure that the lessons of history guide us toward a world where tolerance, compassion, and understanding prevail. Only then we can hope to build a future where the phrase "never again" becomes a reality. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Seppi. The high school is so grateful for your leadership. Thank you for those beautiful words.
We now welcome Senator Harcum to come join us. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. First, I want to thank Supervisor Tipp, Dr. Seppi, the Human Rights, Holocaust and Human Rights Committee here in the town of Newcastle, and certainly the Enough Club and Enough Junior. It is so important, the work you do as young people. As one of you mentioned, Holocaust denial among young people is skyrocketing. And it's so important that we teach those lessons both in school and from a peer-to-peer standpoint. When I was growing up, many of my friends' families were directly impacted by the Holocaust. I had a friend whose father had a tattoo on his arm. My father, like Dr. Seppi, was in World War II and was involved in the liberation of camps in Germany. And so for our generation, this was more of a historical fact than it has been to succeeding generations. And so the education that you do as young people to other young people is incredibly, incredibly important. And that if we're going to talk about the Holocaust, we also need to be honest about the United States' role. And while we talk about our role in defeating Nazi Germany and liberating the camps, the United States knew about what was going on with the Holocaust years before we got involved. The United States turned away a shipload of Jewish refugees who were sent back to Eastern Europe. So we in the United States need to own that truth, and that is why we need to stand up for Jews everywhere, all over the world. And that's why the attacks of October were also so galling. 12,000 people, or 1,200 people massacred, mostly innocent civilians, simply because they were Jewish. So we have a moral responsibility here in the United States to stand up for Jews around the world and Jews at home, and to stand up and speak out against anti-Semitism firmly, decisively, and strongly every time it lifts its ugly head here in the United States. But I would add we need to do that sensitively because there's also a rise in Islamophobia as well. And here in the Hudson Valley, we have a robust Muslim population. And so we need to denounce Islamophobia as we denounce anti-Semitism here at home. So I want to thank everybody for putting this together tonight. And Mr. Ullman, thank you so much for sharing your experience, strength, and hope with us tonight. And I think at the end of this, you know, I am heartened that it's easy to tear the world down with hate. It's harder to build the world up with love. But I am so convinced there are more of us who love than hate, but we have a lot of work to do. And thank you again, Mr. Ullman. Thank you. God bless.
Thank you so much, Senator Harcum, for your powerful words. We also want to acknowledge that Westchester County Legislator Vedat Gashi is also here this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I am Hallie Miller.
And I am Jared Sines. We are the vice presidents of the Enough Club and the student liaisons to the Town of Newcastle Holocaust and Human Rights Committee.
My name is Izzy Schlinger, and I'm in 8th grade, and I'm a member of the Enough Junior Club.
Tonight it is our privilege to introduce Holocaust survivor Leo Ullman, who was born in Amsterdam in 1939. Leo was hidden by a Christian family for 796 days. After the war, he came to the United States with his family in December 1947.
Leo graduated Andover and Harvard and went on to receive law and business degrees from Columbia University. He also served in the United States Marine Corps. Leo practiced law for more than 30 years and currently runs a real estate ownership and management firm. Leo has been married for 64 years and has 4 children and 9 grandchildren.
Leo is passionate about sharing his story and the lessons of the Holocaust with young people. To further introduce Leo, we will now watch an 8-minute documentary film created by the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center of Nassau County. After the short film, we will share his story, followed by a Q&A.
Holocaust survivor Leo Ullman is one of the most interesting people I have ever met. He's a Harvard grad, a wildly successful entrepreneur, a philanthropist, and an accomplished athlete who has completed 145 triathlons. And that's barely scratching the surface of this man's extraordinary life.
My life was not defined by the Holocaust.
The 83-year-old who lives in this beautiful home on the water in Sands Point, Long Island, is among the youngest Holocaust survivors. He wasn't even a year old when the Nazis invaded the Netherlands in May of 1940.
At first, my parents and I had the chance to escape. We went to a fishing port in Holland. The scene at the fishing port was utter chaos. There were not big boats taking people to England. Rather, it was just a lot of people hoping to get onto a fishing boat or two.
Leo and his parents, named Frank and Emily Ullman, could not get onto one of those boats. Life in the Netherlands soon became increasingly more difficult for the Jews. It started with decrees. First, for all of the country's approximately 140,000 Jews to relocate to the country's capital city of Amsterdam.
Every Jew had to have a J on his identity card, and every male Jew had to include the name Simon as a middle name, and every female Jew had to include the word Sarah as her middle name.
And then it got even worse as transports to forced labor and death camps began.
People who were elderly, invalid, children were being pushed into cattle cars.
Leo's parents felt they had no choice but to go into hiding in March of 1943 when Leo was 3 years old. With help from Emily's friends in the resistance, they secured this hiding place for Leo in the apartment of a Christian family. It was an unimaginable decision to separate from their little boy, not knowing if they'd ever see him again. Frank and Emily hid in this attic of a storefront on a main street right in the heart of the city, the same city where Anne Frank was in hiding with her family.
Every step outside, every motorized vehicle, every noise could have meant the end of their lives. And to live under that kind of unbelievable pressure and terror is something you can't replicate in a play about Anne Frank or in anything else.
Leo and his parents miraculously survived the war. A Dutch policeman and his wife risked their lives to hide Leo and treated him as if he was their own son. Leo is still in touch with the descendants of his war parents.
I always wondered why in the world my war mother and father would take this ultimate risk, to take in a Jewish child under circumstances where the Nazis were paying huge bounties for anybody that betrayed a Jew, and they would almost certainly kill anybody who was hiding a Jew. And I always asked my war mother, why in the world would you do that? And she said, because it was the right thing to do.
Ordinary people doing extraordinary deeds in the face of absolute death. For Leo, sharing his survival story is critical, especially now as we see a spike in anti-Semitism across the globe.
If we don't tell that story, who is there to tell it? And I also realize that I'm among the youngest survivors. Soon there won't be anybody to tell this story. And therefore, I felt it was very important for me to do that.
And here in the U.S., Leo started a whole new chapter. After the war, his parents had another baby, Leo's younger brother, Henry. In 1947, the family made its way to New York. Leo remembers being on that ship like it was yesterday.
We were on the Westerdam, a converted Liberty ship, and we came to New York in the fog and drizzle, and suddenly the Statue of Liberty appeared. Tears were streaming down my mother's face, and she said, I have trouble saying it, we beat Hitler.
And beat Hitler they did. The Ullman family moved to this home in Port Washington, Long Island, and quickly integrated themselves into the community. Leo wasn't sufficiently challenged academically in the public school system, and he finished high school at the renowned Andover Prep in Massachusetts. He then graduated in 3.5 years from Harvard, where he was also the goalie for the Harvard lacrosse team. He even took a term off from Harvard before graduating to join the Marine Corps. He was in the reserves for 5.5 years while also earning his JD MBA from Columbia.
This is where I spend a huge part of my life.
Here's a glimpse into Leo's Port Washington office for his real estate management company called Vast Good Properties. He started it after leaving his former company, which went public. This is Leo's advice to up-and-coming entrepreneurs and those interested in real estate.
Don't be afraid to put it all on the line. Go out if you can and get a 2-family home and rent it, and then buy a 4-family, and then buy a small apartment building, and maybe you get a little office building here and there. And it works if you're careful. And there's no magic to real estate. It's all common sense. It's not more than that.
Leo's company owns 19 shopping centers, mostly in Pennsylvania, and most of them anchored by giant supermarkets. He takes great pride in his properties and says he's always honest and goes out of his way to show his tenants respect and to learn their stories. Leo's work definitely does fund some of his incredibly interesting hobbies. He recently donated to a university his entire private collection of Nolan Ryan cards and memorabilia. Nolan Ryan is one of the ultimate power pitchers in Major League Baseball, who pitched for 27 years and holds the records for no-hitters and most strikeouts. Leo's collection had about 15,000 items and took him 29 years to accumulate. It's valued at approximately $1.2 million. Leo also wrote a book about his collection, which will be published soon.
My goal at this point is simply to have the book be beautiful. I want it to be evidence of all the work that I've put into it. I don't have to make a nickel on it.
Leo's writing portfolio doesn't stop there. He penned this book about his Holocaust survival story called 796 Days. And back at his beautiful home, Leo's wife, Kay, of 63 years, who is also his high school sweetheart, shares how important she believes it is for Leo to tell his tale to anyone who will listen, especially since Leo is an increasingly rare first-hand witness.
I think that's most important that he's a primary source.
My story on Leo could be never-ending. This man is a force to be reckoned with. He has biked across the country, completed 145 triathlons, and 3 Ironman races. Together, he and Kay have 4 children and 9 grandchildren.
It was always my mother's credo that we beat Hitler. And how did we beat them? We created what we think is a wonderful family.
A wonderful family and a powerful legacy, Leo's greatest revenge against the Nazis. In Sands Point, Long Island, Dana Arshin, HMTC.
Thank you all very much. It's an honor and pleasure to be here in Chappaqua, beautiful Chappaqua, and also among the elected officials, and especially the Enough Club, which is outstanding, and that's where the future is. So thank you all very much for being here and hopefully tolerating my story. You've seen quite a bit of it, and I'm just going to focus on a few things if I could. I was born in 1939. My parents, my mother was well-to-do. Her family was in the diamond business. And going back to Holland, I'd like to focus tonight a bit on Holland as the background. In 1940, there were approximately 140,000 Jews in the Netherlands. Of those 140,000, 85,000 lived in Amsterdam. Of those 85,000, 25,000 were engaged in the diamond business. My mother's family was in the diamond business. They lived very well, were well-to-do, lived right near the Rijksmuseum. They had chauffeurs, they had maids. They were fully integrated into Dutch society. My father was born in Germany. He came to Holland at age 18 because there was no future for him in Germany. So he arrived in Holland in 1932. In 1936, he married my mother, who had actually been engaged to somebody else, but she thought my father was nice. He was a swimmer. He was a good guy. And they married in 36, and everything was fine. He had a job in the largest department store in Holland, the Macy's of Holland, called the Bijenkorf, the Beehive, and they were fine. In 1939, I was born, and we lived in an apartment in Amsterdam South where the reasonably well-to-do Jewish population was located, and everything was fine. Hitler had promised as late as September of 1939 that he would not attack Holland. Holland had been neutral during World War I, so the thought was that Holland would not be attacked, and if Hitler opened a front on the western part of Europe, Holland would be okay. Holland was not strong militarily, needless to say. Even in this day, the Dutch army is unionized. They don't have to salute. They don't have to march in unison. The Dutch are not military oriented. So they thought everything would be okay. On May 10th, 1940, Hitler bombed the city of Rotterdam to smithereens. Thousands were killed, many tens of thousands were homeless, and he announced that the Dutch government had to capitulate within 2 days, else he would bomb the cities of Amsterdam and others also to smithereens. The Dutch government in 2 days did capitulate, and the Queen and her cabinet moved to London. In the meantime, during those first couple of days, people were able to get out. There were people in my family who were able to get out. They were able to go to fishing ports where with coins they could purchase travel by fishing boat to England and hopefully from there to America or Canada. My mother's sister was able to get out with her family. Others in our family were able to get out. My mother's sister wound up in Port Washington, New York, and they were fine. We went to a fishing port. We thought that we too would get a fishing boat and get to London. Ultimately, we went to this port. It was utter chaos. There weren't fishing boats available. I had an earache, and my grandmother had a toothache, or vice versa. We were going with my grandmother and my parents and myself. So we decided to go back to our apartment in Amsterdam, and we'd escape another day. Within a couple of days, the border was indeed sealed by the Germans, and we could not get out. So we thought we would be okay, but shortly after the city of Rotterdam was bombed, Hitler appointed a man named Seyss-Inquart to be the governor of the Netherlands. Seyss-Inquart was a roaring anti-Semite. He had been in charge of Austria when he invited Hitler to come and take Austria over. From the moment that Seyss-Inquart came into Holland, the decrees started coming. And the first decree was that all Jews had to have a J on their identity papers. Next, all Jews ages 6 or over had to wear a Jewish star, which had to be sewn on your clothes, not just pinned. And anybody seeking to help Jewish people would be subject to being sent to jail. Other decrees started coming. We could not use public transportation, so we could not use any kind of trains or trams. All Jews had to come to Amsterdam. So suddenly in our apartment, we had 8 persons rather than just the 3 of us. But we were alive, and we got along somehow with all these family members. But we were also not allowed to use telephones. We were not allowed to use any means of transportation, such as bicycles, cars, trams, anything of the sort. We could not go to public schools. We could not go to restaurants. We could not go to parks. But again, we were still alive, and we were able to function. My mother's sister, at a given moment, was called up the same route as the Frank family, ultimately, to Auschwitz and to Bergen-Belsen. She was called up because her husband was active in the resistance, and she and her 3 children were taken to a concentration camp in Germany. But notwithstanding that, my parents were still okay. And then my father got a notice that he had to go to a work camp in Germany. At that point, there were not killing camps, there were work camps, and people thought they were work camps. And my father went to the station and he saw that, as you may have seen in the movie, that it wasn't just healthy people that were going, because my parents were young and healthy. They thought that they could survive a work camp, and no one knew how long the war would last. And they were fully prepared to do that. And when he went to the station, he saw that people were being pushed into cattle cars and the gates locked behind them. He thought this wasn't going to go very well. And because my mother's sister and her family had been taken, he made the decision, or they made the decision, my parents did, that they had to go into hiding as the only means of saving my life and their own lives. That was a very, very difficult decision. Imagine just giving up your child who wasn't yet 3 years old to save your life, and the decision to go into a hiding place and to live like rats, as my mother called it. And here they were. They'd been completely assimilated. They'd led a wonderful life, and now they had to decide to go live like rats and give up their kid. They made that decision, as hard as it was. And before they went into hiding, my father decided that he would have to pay for going into hiding. And he decided that he had to pay for their hiding place, he had to pay for food, and so forth. And he ultimately decided to do that by selling rugs. He had been a rug dealer, he had been a rug salesman at the largest department store, as I mentioned, and he dealt with a Muslim rug dealer. And he went to that rug dealer and he said, you know, my family has to go into hiding, and before we go into hiding, I have to make some money, and could I have some rugs, and I'll sell them on consignment, meaning that he wouldn't have to pay until he sold them. And he made that deal, and within a few months, he did sell quite a few rugs. And at a given moment, he decided that we absolutely had to go into hiding. So he went to the rug dealer, and he said to him, I'm giving you back these rugs, and we have to go into hiding. And then the rug dealer made a very important contribution to our lives. The rug dealer said to him, when you go into hiding, take this with you. It's a Muslim prayer rug. It's a very, very good rug. So, you know, this is the rug. It's a Muslim prayer rug. And as you will see, you're not allowed to show a face. And here's where the hands go. And he said, I know that you worship a different God than I do, but take this rug with you, and Allah will save you. And my parents took this rug into hiding. And to get to the end of the story before I've started, maybe they were saved by Allah. This story carries well when I speak to groups where there are a lot of Muslims, as you can imagine. And I've always rolled it up, and a young Muslim lady told me that you had to fold it a certain way, which I've been doing ever since. At any rate, they had to arrange for me to go into hiding, and they had to arrange for their own hiding place in the meantime. For me, the resistance in Holland was very important. There was not military resistance, needless to say, because the Dutch were very weak militarily, but there was resistance, passive resistance. And for my parents, the most important part of the resistance at the outset was a sorority sister of my mother. And my mother was in the University of Amsterdam for 1 year, and she was in this sorority. And a sorority in Holland is different from a sorority in the US, because in Holland it's a lifetime commitment. It's not just college years. And her close friend was in the resistance, and she had a contact with a minister in the city of Haarlem, the city of Haarlem in Holland, where this minister would arrange for Jewish kids to go into hiding. And through that, I wound up first with a young man outside the city of Amsterdam and his wife. They were newly married. And I was there briefly, and their marriage broke up, probably because of me. And I was sent off to a sort of orphanage just north of Amsterdam. And the father and mother of this young man decided that they liked me. And he, as a policeman or a retired policeman, was able to get a permit to go through the German lines at the Dutch railroad station and go to the north of Amsterdam, where he picked me up on his bicycle and brought me back to his apartment in Amsterdam. They didn't know who I was. They knew I was a Jewish kid. They didn't know my name, didn't know where I came from. And they decided that they would take me in. The long story is that I stayed with these war parents, as I called them, and their sister, not their sister, my war sister, their adopted daughter. She and I shared a room, and I was with them for, as you heard, almost 2.5 years. They took the ultimate risk. If anybody knew that they were hiding a Jewish kid, we would be killed, or they would be killed immediately. My parents, in the meantime, found a hiding place for which they had to pay in the attic of a main street in Amsterdam. There was a shoe store at the bottom, and they were in an attic, and in between lived the people that owned the shoe store, and above them was a young couple who went to work every day, and above them in the attic, unknown to the people in between, my parents were there for just about 2.5 years with no electricity, no heat, no light, they somehow stayed in that room and survived with very, very little food, and ultimate complete terror for almost 2.5 years in one room, 24 hours a day. My wife and I in a canoe can't last more than an hour. I don't know how they could conceivably have done that, but they did. And so part of the deal was that they were not allowed to know where I was. Only the resistance knew and kept track, because they didn't want either the people that took care of me or they themselves to ultimately betray me willingly or unwittingly. I didn't know that a war was going on. I was less than 3 when I started. I was there, as I mentioned, for 2.5 years, just short of 2.5 years. I just knew that that tulip bulbs and sugar beets were what you ate, and that's what we ate. And we were a little bit lucky in that my war father had a female friend who was German and worked in a bar in Amsterdam. And through that, they would learn when there would be razzias, raids, where the Germans would block off both ends of a street and go house by house looking for hidden Jews. There were a couple of those raids that took place where my parents were in hiding. They were able to survive those raids because my father, who had been a handy craftsman after he lost his job, as all Jews did, he was a craftsman creating various types of wood products, and he was able to create a hiding place under his stairs. And during those raids, they always said they stood there and they could hear their heartbeat. And if the Nazis had taken dogs, as they sometimes did when they went on these raids, my parents would have been picked up. But they survived, and I survived. My parents had a very difficult time. My father never got out. My mother took the ultimate risk a couple of times to get out of the apartment, and she had a toothache that was so terribly debilitating that she couldn't stand it, and she would take the risk of trying to find a dentist during occupied Amsterdam. She knew that the dentists were on a particular street of Amsterdam, and she one night decided that she would just go at dusk. As a young woman, she had a reasonable chance, if she went at dusk, of not being picked up. Any young man would have been picked up immediately. And she went to the street where she knew there were dentists, and she knocked on the door of a dentist she didn't know and told him that she didn't have any money, and she couldn't tell him her name. But would he help her? And he indeed did. At that point, there was no electricity, so he had to drill her teeth with a pump like the old Singer sewing machines, let's say, and create enough power to drill. And he told her to come back in a couple of days, and he would take out the stitches. And she did come back in a couple of days, the same way, leaving at dusk and clothing carefully so that she would not be recognized. And she went to the same dentist, and not only did he help take out the stitches, but he also gave her a loaf of bread, which was worth anything in those days. At any rate, along finally came the end of the war. It was May 5th of 1945. The city of Amsterdam was liberated by the Canadian Maple Leaf Brigade, and my parents came to learn where I was in hiding, and my war parents knew that if my parents survived, they would come to pick me up. And they came a couple of days, actually, after Holland was liberated. Even during those first days, the Nazis in this main square of Amsterdam, after the war had been ended formally, actually shot a lot of Dutch people from a balcony in the main square. My parents came to pick me up. I didn't recognize them. It had been 2.5 years. I was less than 3, and then I was not yet 6. And these people who looked just awful, they were emaciated. They may have weighed 60, 70 pounds. My father's feet were like this because he couldn't walk, and they said they were my parents. That was tough for everybody. It was tough for my war parents because I had become their son. It was tough for my parents because I didn't know them. And it was tough for me in a way because suddenly these people were my parents and I had to go with them. I did go with them to their hiding place where they saved for the day that I would come back. They saved a can of beans, baked beans, under the floorboards. Even though they were absolutely starving, they were hoping that the day would come when they could pick me up. And they had saved this can of beans, and they opened it with great ceremony, and they offered it to me, and I said, "Blah, I don't like beans." So at any rate, the process went over a period of days and perhaps weeks to get comfortable with my real parents again. And in the meantime, my war father stayed very much with me. He walked me to school every day. I went to a Montessori school for a short period, and he walked me to school every day. I had an eye operation shortly after liberation, and he visited me in the hospital every day. It was very important. My parents, shortly after the war, my father got, war ended, my father got his job back. They got a nice house in Amsterdam. They had a little car, and you would think things would be okay, but they weren't, because all of their friends had been killed. Houses that they knew where their friends were empty. And the Dutch economy was in the dumps. And in the meantime, my mother's mother, who had been able to secrete some money in the U.S. Before the war, and her family was in the diamond business, as I mentioned, she was able to come to America, specifically to New York, in 1946. And she also urged us to come to the U.S., as did my mother's sister and her family. And ultimately, my grandmother, my mother's mother, bought us a house in Port Washington, where my mother's sister had also landed. And all of that was good. My brother, whom was mentioned in the movie, was born in 1946, and my wife figured out that that he was born about 9 months after the war ended. So we sort of know how my parents celebrated the end of the war. My brother was also named after my war parents. His name was Hendrik Jan Ullman, and Hendrik was my war father, and Jan was short for Jannetje, which was my war mother's name. They have been very important, needless to say, in saving my life, and we have tried to honor that. I think I would like to end my presentation with that story right now. As you heard, we wound up in America, and life is so terrific in the U.S. It's just amazing how fortunate we all are, even during these difficult times. If that's okay with you, I'd like to take Q&A if anybody is game to help me with that.
Thank you so much for your story. To this day, have you stayed in touch with any of the people that have saved your life?
I'm sorry, give me that again.
To this day, have you stayed in touch with any of the people that have saved your life?
Oh, very much so. As I mentioned, my war parents saved my life, so they're very important to me. And I arranged to have them admitted to Yad Vashem, which was a lot of work because you have to create a lot of proof, but the people who saved me were admitted to Yad Vashem as the righteous among nations. It's people who were non-Jews who saved Jews during the war, and that was very meaningful. My war father died in 1951, so not too long after the war. The story of how he died is different depending on whether you talk to my war family or to my parents. My parents say that he died in my Aunt Paula, that was the German girlfriend, Aunt Paula's bed. My war my war family is they are convinced he died in a taxi cab. I stayed very close to my war mother. As you may have heard, I did practice law. I had my own law firm. I started with a very elegant New York law firm called Sullivan and Cromwell, where I was proud to be one of 2 Jews in the firm. I had my own firm, and most of my clients were Dutch, so I went back and forth to Holland many, many, many times, probably 10 to 12 times a year. I actually had a law office in Amsterdam for a while. And I would always visit my war mother and my war sister. My war mother lived until the 80s, and I was at her deathbed when she died. And I always asked her, why would you do this? And as you heard, she said, because it's the right thing to do. It was the right thing to do. She was very religious. And I asked her if there's anything she might want, because I owed her everything. And she said she wanted a pocketbook. So I jumped into my car. I drove at breakneck speed from Utrecht to Amsterdam and went into the main shopping street of Amsterdam, and I bought the most beautiful Gucci Poochie pocketbook. And she stroked it a few times, but I don't think she ever used it. We have honored the war parents and the people who saved my father's family, and also my grandmother on my mother's side. They were all saved by a policeman in Utrecht. And they basically were not in hiding the way that we were. They were able to mostly circulate among living people normally during the war with fake IDs, and because they were fluent in German, they were able to get along. I should say that my war parents did circulate freely like that until April of 1945, 1 month before the war ended. And my father, my grandfather and grandmother on my father's side were in Utrecht, and they lived with a young German woman, which was therefore a gathering place of many Germans during the war. And again, because they were fluent in German and had fake IDs, they were okay. But at the last moment, a German policeman took a look at my grandfather's fake IDs, and the fake IDs were always taken, their names were taken from the tombstones of Christian burial grounds. And he looked at the fake ID was fine, but he said, "Could I see your wedding ring?" And he took off my grandfather's wedding ring, and the initials within the ring didn't match the fake ID, so they were sent to jail. But it was April of 1945, so they did survive. At any rate, I did stay close to this, to my war family, and we created a room in their honor at the Stockton University in South Jersey. And my most favorite experience in that room, which has a lot of stuff from the war in it and a lot of photos of my war parents and of the people who saved my father's family. That's all in that room, but a few months ago, I had the opportunity to host Arnold Schwarzenegger in that room, and that was an ultimate highlight. So I have matched my war parents with Arnold Schwarzenegger. So anyway, I did do that.
We just have one more question before we give it out to anyone else in the crowd. Can you compare your situation to Anne Frank's?
No. I think it's very different from Anne Frank, and I have to tell you a story that's sort of unique about my relationship to the Anne Frank story. Anne Frank was not Dutch. She did not have a Dutch support system like my parents did. Anne Frank was born in Austria, Germany. Her family, together with many other German immigrants, were in a separate part of Holland. They were never citizens. Most of them didn't speak Dutch. And they did not have what we had, the people in the resistance helping them. And with 8 people in the hiding place, they were doomed. Somehow they had to get food, and people had to learn that they were there. So I think it was very different from the way that my parents went into hiding, just the 2 of them, and that they gave me up in order to save our lives. But I have a special link to Anne Frank. You may have heard I was the head of the Anne Frank Center in the U.S. For many years. And I was very close to Miep Gies, and she's the woman who saved the diary. And I was on TV with Miep many times, and my parents became close to Miep and Jan Gies, and they stayed at our house and so forth. I took them to meet Janet Reno, which was a highlight of their lives. At any rate, while I was the head of the Anne Frank Center in the USA, I was very close to the Dutch Anne Frank House. And the Dutch Anne Frank House had a financial director named Cor Suik, and Cor was fired, but he had become very close as the financial director with Otto Frank, the father of Anne Frank, who had moved to Basel, Switzerland, and remarried, and created a foundation, an Anne Frank Fonds, it's called, and it has all the rights to the diary, but he and Cor Suik communicated frequently and visited one another frequently, and they had financial dealings to deal with between them. And Cor was fired by the Dutch group, and he came to me and asked me for a job, and I said I would hire him as the international director, advisor, whatever. And at a given moment, Mr. Suik came to me with a manila envelope with 5 pages of the handwritten original Anne Frank diary in it that had never seen the light of day. As you may have heard, I went to law school. I didn't learn in law school what you should do when you have 5 pages of the Anne Frank diary. I really didn't know quite what to do, but I thought I would call my friends at the Anne Frank house in Amsterdam and find out if they would want these pages. Surely they would. No, they wouldn't touch them. They said that this guy stole them. They didn't believe it. They weren't sure they were authentic. And no, they wouldn't touch them. So I, first of all, tried to find out if these pages had any value. I went to the Morgan Library and learned that they had value, to my great surprise. And I was sure that we should auction them and some Russian oligarch would buy them. Ultimately, just before we were going to auction them, the Netherlands National War Documentation Institute bought them from us for $300,000, which were supposed to go to my Anne Frank Center, but instead, Mr. Sau created his own foundation and he kept the $300,000. At any rate, those pages were sent to the War Documentation Institute. They were studied and completely verified to be authentic. And since 2003, those pages have been in the Anne Frank diary. So that's my Anne Frank answer anyway. I'll take any other questions. Do we have time for?
Yeah, they want, if anyone in the audience wants to ask questions, they'll walk around.
Does anyone have any questions?
Oh, there is a question. I thought I'd lulled you all to sleep. But
first of all, thank you so much for being here and sharing your story.
Thank you very much.
God bless you and your family.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's emotional for us. I was just curious to know your war sister. What was the age difference and how did she handle the whole thing?
My war sister's name was Tilly. She was short for Matilda. Tilly was 14 years older than I, and we shared a room, which I know that she didn't love that. And I was terrible in that relationship at that time because I once told my war parents that I wish Tilly was dead, then we'd have more to eat. That's nice, isn't it? But I stayed close to Tilly, and every time I was in Holland, we visited Tilly, and even my children, a couple of my kids met Tilly. Tilly lived in a small subsidized housing unit outside of Amsterdam after the war, and she smoked like crazy. Oh man, that place smelled like hell. It was really awful, and but she was a really good person, and she didn't speak English. A couple of words from the TV, but that was about it. But we stayed close to Tilly all those years also, and to Tilly's kids who have come to visit us in the U.S.
Hi, I was just wondering, who snuck the food up to your parents during all that time?
I'm sorry, I didn't, how did?
Who is this working? Who snuck the food up, to your parents?
Well, my parents, because they had fake IDs, were able to get those fake IDs to the people on the ground floor who hid them, who arranged for the hiding. And with the fake IDs, they were able to get some food rations here and there. Through my mother's war sister, through my mother's sorority sisters, here and there she was able to get a little bit of food. But in 1944, there was a hunger winter, which was really brutal. What happened was that the Dutch Queen, who was in England, decreed that the Dutch railroad system should not convey any further factories or anything of metal to Germany because they would be using it for the war effort, including up to church bells, for example. And that decree was so upsetting to the Nazis that they would not allow any more food to go to Holland. And in the meantime, the winter in 1944 was very severe, and the canals froze, so they couldn't get ships to come to Holland. So during that period, an estimated 60,000 people died in Holland from hunger. You all have to tell me how, you know. Hello.
Hi. When you first saw your parents after being away from them for a long time, how did you feel? Did you I know you didn't I said you didn't say that you didn't recognize them, but
I did not recognize them because I was just a toddler when I went off, and these people that I lived with took care of me, and to their credit, they never made me call them mom or dad. And they never required that I pursue the religion with them. They knew that they were caretakers. And a lot of other people who went into hiding did not have that experience. So I don't think that I can remember anything of that day except seeing them at that point and the war ending in Holland. What's really significant at that time is that, as you may have heard, large bounties were paid for anybody who betrayed a hidden Jewish person. And there were gangs that were created to go out and find these people because they would get these bounties. My war parents always thought they had dyed my hair blonde, and they always thought that I had hair then instead. They dyed the hair blonde, and they always thought that no one on the block knew that they were hiding a Jewish kid. It turns out at the end of the war, everybody knew, and nobody betrayed us. So it's pretty special. Yes? Good.
How's that? Okay.
Good.
Thank you, as everyone else has been thanking you. Very inspiring. My father was a Holocaust survivor. He passed away at 97, and he was a big he was an Auschwitz survivor as well, and he was a big proponent of exercise, and it motivated him. It gave him a lot of joy in his life, and I was kind of dazzled by your athleticism and in the documentary, and I was wondering if you can speak a little bit about how you embraced exercise and what it meant to you in your own lifetime, and if it helped you work through a lot of trauma.
I'd like to relate it to surviving the Holocaust, but I really can't. Although I was a survivor to do 3 Ironmen, but it has nothing to do with that. What happened was that I have 4 children. We have 4 children, one of whom is here, my daughter Valerie. And Valerie herself is a very good runner, or was, I should say. And in turn, 2 of her 3 kids are very good runners. But they decided that we should do the New York Marathon. This was, I think, 1991, maybe 1992. And so we did the New York Marathon, and we trained together an extra mile every week, and we got there, and we did it, and loved it. It's very thrilling to come across that 59th Street Bridge into Manhattan. There's nothing like it with all the cameras and all the TVs and the noise and the bands. It was thrilling, and it was so thrilling that they all quit. And I decided that this is sort of fun, and I could ride a bike. And my father was a swimmer, and I was a decent swimmer. And now I could run. And I kept going, and they stopped. And I just loved biking especially. And you may have heard I went across the U.S. in 25 days for 120 miles a day. It was like Marine Corps boot camp. It wasn't fun. It was just biking. But I loved it, and I always loved swimming. So I learned to run, and I did it until a few years ago, actually, about 4 or 5 years ago. And in my age group, I was always the only one in my age group. So I showed up, I got a medal, and this is terrific. But it was ended really dramatically. My wife said to me one day, "What's the point of coming in last?" and that was it.
Okay, I'm sorry, I have to do the last question just because we're out of time. Although, I don't know if you'll hang around at the end maybe for a little bit. Sorry. The one question I just wanted to ask is what your message is to the next generation and the generations to come.
Okay, the important message of my story is, first of all, you have to appreciate that in my mind there are different categories of survivors. I didn't knowingly suffer. I didn't go through whatever it takes for people to escape from concentration camps and so forth. It's unbelievable to me. But the story that is important to me is that there were ordinary people, and I put ordinary in quotes, doing extraordinary deeds to save people who were being subject to hatred and everything else that happens in the world. And there are always good people out there, and as you may have heard from the talks from at the beginning of this program, it's critical that our story be told and not be diminished. There's a concept of Holocaust and Tolerance Center. Tolerance isn't the right word. And what it takes is, as you heard, standing up for what's right. It's important, among other things, to keep talking. And the real answer to what's happening in the world has to be education. Education, the Enough Club is a wonderful example. We have to teach younger people what's right and what's wrong, and to tell the story of the Holocaust. Even in Holland, of all places, half the people don't know that Holland was subject to the Holocaust. In the US, half the country doesn't know anything about the story of the Holocaust. In Germany, by contrast, the Holocaust is taught in great depth from a very early age, and that's what it really takes. The thing that I find somewhat comforting with all the anti-Semitism that there is, and there's always been anti-Semitism, but it's rampant now, and to some extent, somewhat understandable. I think through all of this, education is the answer. And in Germany, they educate kids from very early days throughout the country. It's remarkable. It's a guilt complex for sure. But the important thing is that they, at the government level, have instituted powerful education on the Holocaust. We are failing in that regard still. Yes, maybe in this area of New York and on Long Island and in South Jersey, yes, the Holocaust is known. but it's not known elsewhere. And we have to keep educating to the extent that we can with the types of activities, as you see here, with the Enough clubs. That's the answer. That's the only answer I can give.
Hi, I'm Eva Millerman, and I am a vice president in the Enough Club.
Hi, I am Cami Weinstein, and I am a 7th grader in the Enough Junior Club.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Fishman, and I'm a 7th grader in the Enough Junior Club.
Thank you, Mr. Ullman, for sharing your story and important messages with us. One of the best ways for us to combat Holocaust denial is by educating ourselves by listening to firsthand accounts such as yours. We thank you for sharing your story with us tonight. We are all now witnesses.
We are excited to announce the 5th annual Writing and Art Contest for the Holocaust Remembrance, sponsored by Enough Club, the Enough Junior Club, and the Town of Newcastle Holocaust and Human Rights Committee. On the screen, you'll see the publicity flyer for the contest.
The contest for middle school and high school students will launch on Monday, February 12th and end on Monday, April 8th. The contest information can be found on mynewcastle.org. After the program, Mr. Ullman will be in the lobby selling and signing copies of his books. All proceeds will benefit the Enough Club and the Holocaust Museum of Nassau County. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Please get home safely.